Hey, toy fans, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich here to discuss something that comes up on the comments on this channel all the time. Conan the Barbarian and the animated series Blackstar. Were these the influence for Masters of the Universe, aka He-Man? After all, Blackstar has two different swords, right? It has a evil version of the sword, and it has its counterpart. It has its, the good guy version of the sword. And the swords even combine together, just like Skeletor's and He-Man's did in the original content. Actually, you can see a link to the video to understand that a little bit better, since that changed. And Conan. Conan was obviously a barbarian, and He-Man is a barbarian. So is He-Man just a ripoff of Conan? Well, this is Scott ToyGuru Neitlich. I've been in the toy industry for well over 20 years as a marketer, a designer, and I'm personally a collector, which gives me a very interesting outlook. And as far as those two concepts, well, it's simply not true. Conan and Blackstar are not He-Man, or He-Man is not a ripoff of those. And let me explain why, using facts. All right, so Conan, right? Most people know him from the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, or better yet, from the original books. There were actually quite a few of them. They came out, almost 100 years ago. That's kind of scary since we're in 2020 at this point. Wow, do I feel old? Anyway, the artwork for Conan the Barbarian that existed at the time He-Man was made in 1980 was mostly from the books and the comic book series because the Schwarzenegger film hadn't come out yet. In fact, if you actually look at the original edition of the book, Conan doesn't look anything like what you would say He-Man does, right? I mean, he looks more like a Roman soldier, if you will. This was how Robert Howard envisioned him. He later became the barbarian look, especially thanks to the comic books and all of the fantasy art done for different paperback editions. So let's take a quick pause then and explore sort of the stereotypic motif of a barbarian. This obviously predates He-Man, and it predates Conan. The idea of a muscle-bound warrior with a beard and skulls and furry boots and furry shorts and, maybe horns or wings coming out of their hat. Well, clearly this predates Conan, published in the 30s, and way predates He-Man, but really a lot of this comes out of the 1870s and the way Vikings were incorrectly and historically inaccurately, there we go, I said it, depicted in drawings and in books, if you will. Barbarians really look more like this if you were going to go historically. They weren't these giant muscle-bound guys riding half-dead horses, carrying skulls in the air and, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a product of pop culture. And art like this, or like this one also by Frank Frazetta, and I know this particular piece came out after He-Man. I just really like it, but you get the point. I'm just trying to illustrate that these kind of images did predate He-Man. So He-Man as a barbarian really was using these established cultural motifs of what a barbarian looks like. Full of muscles, furry boots, et cetera, et cetera. To say that He-Man is just Conan is like saying, a character like James Bond who wears a tuxedo. Well, that means that every character, who ever wears a tuxedo is just a carbon copy of James Bond. All right, this is not the best example because this was a reference to James Bond, but you get my point. You can't just say one type of outfit makes a character. In fact, Masters of the Universe started off as three completely separate concepts: military, barbarian, and space. All three were presented as a theme for a new boys' toy line by Roger Sweet. In fact, his idea was it was one character that could dress up in any of these armors and get different powers depending on what he wore. If Mattel had gone with the space theme, He-Man probably would have looked like this. After all, the prototype did use a 1979 12-inch Boba Fett part. And if they went with the military theme, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe might have wound up looking like this, with, military characters with all sorts of armor. But they didn't. They went with the barbarian look. They looked at all three, and the toy legend is that Ray Wagner, the president of Mattel, looked at all three, pointed to the barbarian character in the middle, and said, that one has the power, meaning, that one has the power to sell. And that is is how He-Man became themed Barbarian, and Barbarian only. The space and the military was thrown out. As far as Conan the Barbarian, yes, it is 100% true that Mattel looked at the Conan the Barbarian script. They were working with Universal Studios and considering this as a potential toy line. That is factual. But after actually looking at the script, Mattel executives realized that this was an R-rated film. It had not just, sexy characters, both male and female, but it had nudity in it. And it had a lot of violence. Two things that were not going to work for a kiddie toy line. So the script was very, very quickly passed and thrown in the reject pile. So the idea that He-Man then was just a recycled version of Conan, while yes, Mattel was looking at the Conan script, the Barbarian figure was created based on that Roger Sweet trio and the artwork that was generated after that when the Barbarian theme was selected. The group that was looking at the Conan script and then rejected it based on the content, completely separate groups. One group in one building, another group in another. They did not talk to each other, and they did not know that one group was working on a barbarian space military concept and one was looking at a script. Roger Sweet, who created the original He-Man trio with that barbarian concept as one of three possible themes, had no idea that Mattel was also looking at a Conan script in a different building on a different floor. So He-Man is not a rebranding of Conan. It's just one of those things where you went with a theme, a barbarian theme, the same way Conan used a barbarian theme. These, just like Star Wars used a space theme and G.I. Joe used a military theme. All right, let's look at the other major misconception for recycled concepts that people say are He-Man, or He-Man is a ripoff of, and that being Blackstar. All right, so Blackstar was an animated series that came out in 1981 from Filmation, and a big part of it was the sword. It had an iconic sword. And by the way, for the other video where I talk about swords, yes, I know the Sword of Omens and Excalibur are big swords too. All right. Now, Blackstar also, was a barbarian character. Again, just like He-Man, just like Conan, all based on the barbarian motif. His bad guy was called Overlord. Not that Overlord, this Overlord. And was this big purple dude with a cool sort of tri-skull helmet. And, they, just like He-Man and Skeletor, or Superman and Lex Luthor, Batman and the Joker, they were arch enemies. And in this case, Overlord had half of a sword, and Blackstar had the other half of the sword. And these swords could combine, guess what? When you have half a sword and half a sword, what does that make? Well, grade school math will tell you that makes a whole sword. Dun, dun, dun. So the reason that Blackstar gets labeled, or He-Man gets labeled as a ripoff of Blackstar, is, one, they both had a Filmation series. They were both produced by the same studio. But Blackstar came years earlier than He-Man. They were both made by Filmation, but they were not created at the same time. Blackstar was actually completed and done by the time they started working on Masters of the Universe. Yes, they both had barbarian themes, but the idea that He-Man ripped off Blackstar's double sword is factually not true, especially when you look at the timeline and you look at when both were created. So Blackstar was on air in 1981. Masters of the Universe came out in 1982. But obviously both of them were worked on prior to that. Initial work for He-Man started in 1979 and 1980. And the original concept of the two swords, He-Man having one half and Skeletor having the other, and that they would combine to give ultimate power and or become a key to open Castle Grayskull, that was very, very heavy in the original mini-comics. The idea that this concept was taken, lifted, homage to Blackstar just can't factually be true, because Blackstar wasn't on the air in 1979 and 1980 when this concept was created. Toys take 3, 4, 2, many, at least 3 years minimum to make from concept to shelf, which means a toy line from 1982 was being worked on in 1979. And just because He-Man had an animated series made by Filmation and Blackstar had an animated series, The argument is just not valid. There's no way that the Mattel designers could have had knowledge of the Blackstar cartoon when they were creating He-Man with the idea of the two swords combining. The two swords from He-Man and the two swords from Blackstar really were just independent ideas. And you can't, just time travel and go ahead and say, oh, well, because Filmation had Blackstar and Filmation had Masters, that they must have been a ripoff. The Filmation He-Man series came years later, and in the Filmation series, there was no two swords. So it really is a lot like the invention of the telephone. Many, well, actually 3 different inventors created the telephone at the exact same time within the same 60 days. Alexander Graham Bell gets all the credit because he was the first one to get to the patent office. It's as simple as that. But he was absolutely predated. The other inventors just sort of sat on their idea for a little while and weren't as quick. You can look it up. So having 2 different swords that split is basically just lightning in a bottle. It's not that, crazy of an idea. And the idea that 2 different properties could create that at the same time is just what happened. So in conclusion, He-Man is not just a clone of Conan, it's a barbarian theme applied to action figures. And that happens. It's a theme, just like space, just like military. Star Wars could also be said to be this, a ripoff of Flash Gordon, which in a lot of ways it is, as well as Valerian. And if Mattel had gone with the space or the military theme, we wouldn't even be talking about this, because there would be no Conan comparison. Mattel just happened to go with the barbarian theme of the 3 different boys' toy themes presented. And then as far as Blackstar, while it was produced by Filmation, just like Masters of the Universe had a Filmation series, they were not produced together. Blackstar way predated it. And looking at the order of invention, the designers at Mattel with the 2-sword concept had no knowledge that Blackstar also had a 2-sword concept. And that 2-sword concept didn't even make it into the Filmation series. It was dropped. It really only survived in the original 4 mini-comics and maybe some of the DC or the Ladybird books. And that's it. That's how it works. And factually, Conan and Blackstar are not, He-Man is not a ripoff of Blackstar and Conan. And there you go. Hope you enjoyed this. And if you did, hit that subscribe button. Or leave a comment, leave a thumbs up, because that really helps. It tells YouTube to share this video with other fans. And that's the whole point, is to spread toy love and knowledge. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.